The phone always rang at precisely 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoons. It didn't matter if it was raining, if we were in the middle of a heat wave, or if I was exhausted from working a 60-hour week at the clinic. The caller ID would flash with my mother-in-law Claire's name, but I knew the speakerphone would be on. And her son, my husband Tyler, would be leaning in close to listen. "Hi, sweetie." Claire's voice would drift through the speaker, thin and sweet, like cheap syrup masking something bitter underneath. "We were just thinking about you. Tell me, honey, are you alone right now?" For 3 years, I answered that question with complete, naive honesty. I thought it was a sign of closeness, a quirky habit of a tight-knit family, checking in on the girl who had married into their circle. I would tell them that Tyler was out picking up groceries, or that he was at the driving range with his brother, Kyle. I would assure them that the house was quiet, that I was just folding laundry or prepping dinner. I thought they cared about my solitude. I thought they wanted to make sure I wasn't lonely. I was 26 when I married Tyler, and I brought a modest inheritance from my late grandmother into the marriage. A piece of commercial property on the edge of town that brought in a steady, comfortable rental income. Tyler's family, the Rhodes clan, operated on a different currency. They didn't just want wealth. They demanded absolute control over everyone within their orbit. Claire was the matriarch, a woman who weaponized her fragile health to dictate every family gathering, every holiday, and every financial decision. Kyle was the golden child, a man who crashed through business ventures like a toddler with building blocks, always bailed out by his mother's manipulation of the family trust. And Tyler was the bridge between them, the quiet enforcer of their family will. The subtle shifts started small. A comment here about how my property would be safer under the management of the Rhodes family trust. A sigh from Claire during Sunday dinner about how Kyle's latest tech startup needed a small injection of capital, accompanied by a heavy, meaningful look in my direction. When I politely declined to sign over the deed, the atmosphere in the family shifted from suffocating warmth to a chilling, calculated frost. Tyler began spending more time away. He said he was helping Kyle with his books, or taking Claire to her specialist appointments across the state line. I noticed the mileage on our shared SUV didn't match the distance to the hospital. I noticed how Tyler would abruptly silence his phone when he walked into the living room, his face hardening into a mask of indifference whenever I asked how his day was. Last Sunday, the phone rang at exactly 4 p.m. Tyler had left 2 hours earlier, claiming Kyle needed help fixing a leak at his apartment. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by financial statements I had pulled from our filing cabinet after noticing a massive, unauthorized withdrawal from our joint savings account. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a cold dread settling deep in my stomach. The phone buzzed against the coffee table. I picked it up, my thumb trembling over the green icon. "Hi, sweetie," Claire said, her voice dropping to that familiar, conspiratorial whisper. "We were just thinking about you. Tell me, honey, are you alone right now?" Every instinct inside me screamed to say yes, to complain about Tyler's absence, to demand answers about the money. But my eyes caught a stray piece of paper sticking out from beneath Tyler's desk calendar, a receipt from a local boutique hotel dated for that afternoon, listing a room booked under Kyle's name, but paid for with Tyler's credit card. A sudden, sharp clarity washed over me. The weekly question wasn't about my well-being. It was a security check. They needed to know exactly where I was and what I could see. "No," I lied, my voice steady, my tone perfectly calm. "Actually, my sister stopped by unexpectedly. She's sitting right here in the kitchen with me." Why do you ask? There was a sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. I heard a muffled scrape of a chair, and then the line went dead without another word. This is just the beginning of how a single lie exposed a web of absolute betrayal that almost destroyed my life. If you want to know what my husband and his family were actually doing while they thought I was trapped alone in that house, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. The truth gets much darker from here, and you won't want to miss how the pieces finally fell into place. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt like your own family was keeping secrets from you. The silence that followed the disconnected call was heavier than any sound I'd ever heard. I sat staring at the screen of my phone until it went black, reflecting my own pale, wide-eyed face back at me. A normal family would apologize for a dropped call. A normal husband would text 5 minutes later saying, "Hey, my mom's battery died. Everything okay?" Tyler didn't text. Neither did Claire. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely detached from my body, and walked over to Tyler's desk. The receipt from the boutique hotel, the Crestview Lodge, was burning a hole in my mind. The check-in time listed was 1:30 p.m. today. It was now 4:15 p.m. The lodge was only a 20-minute drive from our house. I didn't panic. The sheer intensity of the shock seemed to freeze my emotions, leaving me with a cold, analytical sharpness. I went back to the filing cabinet and began systematically pulling out our bank statements from the last 6 months. I had always trusted Tyler with the primary management of our joint accounts. I ran my clinic. He handled the household finances. It was an arrangement built on the assumption of mutual respect. As I flipped through the pages, the disrespect became quantifiable. There were dozens of small, irregular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. $500 here, $800 there. But the devastating blow was the transaction from 3 weeks ago. $50,000, moved out of our joint savings and into an escrow account. The memo line simply read, "Rhodes Holdings." They hadn't just dipped into our funds. They were actively draining me to feed Kyle's failing real estate venture. And Tyler was the pipeline. At 5:30 p.m., the front door clicked open. I had already put the files back exactly as I found them and was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce I had no intention of eating. Tyler walked in, throwing his keys onto the counter with a forced sigh of exhaustion. "Hey," he said, not looking at me. He walked straight to the fridge and pulled out a beer. Kyle's place was a mess. Pipe burst behind his bathroom wall. Took us hours to patch it up. I watched him. I watched the way his shoulders shifted, the way he avoided my eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he opened the bottle. He was a terrible liar, but I had been too blinded by love to notice it before. "Sounds exhausting," I said, my voice terrifyingly even. "Your mom called earlier." Tyler froze for a fraction of a second, the bottle halfway to his mouth. "Oh, yeah? What did she want?" "Just the usual Sunday check-in," I replied, turning around to face him. "She asked if I was alone. I told her my sister dropped by." The line cut out right after that. Tyler took a long swallow of his beer, his Adam's apple bobbing. When he lowered the bottle, his face had hardened into that familiar defensive mask I had grown to dread. "Right. Yeah, Mom mentioned that. She said she lost reception in the valley, and she was confused because your sister posted on Instagram an hour ago that she's at a spa weekend in Vermont." The trap snapped shut so quickly I could almost hear the click. They hadn't just panicked when I lied. They had immediately gone to verify it. They were monitoring my family's social media. They were calculating my exact coordinates. "Must have been a delayed post," I said softly, turning back to the stove. She's right here in town. Tyler didn't push it, but the air in the kitchen grew suffocatingly tense. He didn't ask to see my sister. He didn't walk into the living room to look for her. He knew she wasn't there, and I knew he knew. We were two actors on a stage, reciting lines from entirely different plays. Later that night, while Tyler was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a lock screen notification from Kyle. She's lying about her sister. She was alone. We need to move the signing up to Tuesday before she starts asking about the escrow transfer. The shower stopped running. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing that the betrayal wasn't just financial. It was a coordinated, deliberate ambush, and the clock was ticking. The next morning, Tyler left the house earlier than usual, claiming he had an urgent breakfast meeting with a potential investor for Kyle's company. He kissed my cheek before he left, his lips cold and dry against my skin. I didn't pull away. I let him play his part so I could continue playing mine. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I called my real estate attorney, an old family friend named Eric. I needed to know exactly what the signing on Tuesday meant and how they could possibly legally target my property without my explicit consent. They can't touch the deed itself without your signature, Eric explained over the phone, his voice laced with professional concern. But if Tyler has power of attorney, or if you signed any of those boilerplate management documents when you married into the family, they could legally lease the property, borrow against the future rental income, or tie it up in litigation for years. My stomach dropped. When we got married, Claire had insisted on our family accountant handling our taxes. She had presented a stack of paperwork at a crowded dinner celebrating our first anniversary, framing it as a gift to take the burden off my shoulders. I remembered signing those papers, surrounded by the clinking of wine glasses and the loud, distracting laughter of my in-laws. I had trusted them. I need copies of everything I signed, I told Eric, my hand tightening around the steering wheel of my car as I drove toward the Rhodes family estate. And I need them today. I didn't wait for Eric to find the files. I needed to see Claire myself. I needed to look at the woman who had spent 3 years pretending to be my second mother, while secretly calculating the net worth of my grief. When I arrived at the Rhodes home, a sprawling, ostentatious house built on old money and older secrets, Claire was sitting on the patio, sipping tea. She looked fragile, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a cashmere shawl draped over her shoulders, despite the morning warmth. But when she looked up and saw me walking across the lawn, her eyes flashed with a cold, predatory sharpness that she quickly masked with a smile. "Why, honey, what a surprise," she said, her voice dropping into that sweet, syrupy register. "Tyler said you were swamped at the clinic today." "I took a personal day," I said, sitting down opposite her without being asked. "I wanted to check on you. You seemed so abrupt on the phone yesterday." Claire reached across the table, her thin, manicured fingers wrapping around my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly tight, like a bird of prey locking its talons into a target. "Oh, sweetie, my blood pressure has just been so erratic lately. When you said your sister was there, it just startled me. We worry about you so much when you're alone in that big house. A young woman needs family protection." "I have family," I said softly, looking down at her hand on my wrist. "I have Tyler." Claire laughed, a short, sharp sound that held zero warmth. "Of course you do, honey, but Tyler is a Rhodes. His first priority will always be the preservation of this family's legacy. Kyle is facing some very unfair legal troubles with his latest development project. and it's putting a terrible strain on all of us. We all have to make sacrifices for the greater good." The word sacrifices hung in the humid morning air like a threat. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. She was testing my compliance, pushing the boundaries to see how much emotional pressure I could take before I broke. "I understand," I replied, forcing a tight, submissive smile. "Tyler mentioned Kyle was stressed." "He is," Claire said, leaning closer, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint and stale tea. "In fact, Tyler and Kyle are meeting with our estate lawyer tomorrow morning at 10 to finalize some asset protection structures. It would mean the world to me if you would trust Tyler to handle your commercial property under that umbrella." "It's what a good wife does, honey. It keeps everything safe inside the family circle." She smiled, but her eyes were dead. The trap wasn't just set for Tuesday. She was telling me to walk into it willingly. If I refused, the masks would come off completely, and they would use whatever legal leverage they already held to destroy me. As I drove away from the estate, my phone buzzed in the console. It was a text from Eric with an attached PDF document. It was the anniversary paperwork from 2 years ago. Hidden deep within the dense legal jargon of paragraph 14 was a limited power of attorney clause, granting Tyler the right to execute financial contracts on my behalf in the event of family financial restructuring. They didn't need my signature on Tuesday. Tyler already had it. I didn't confront Tyler when he came home that evening. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the document in his face. And I didn't demand to know how he could look at me every night while actively preparing to sign away my autonomy. If I reacted now, they would simply pivot. They would accelerate their timeline. Or worse, revoke my access to the accounts before I could see the full extent of the damage. Instead, I became an invisible ghost in my own marriage. I watched, I listened, and I recorded. When Tyler sat down for dinner, I watched the mechanical way he cut his steak. I listened to his fabricated stories about his day, noting the exact moments his voice pitched higher when he lied. He told me he'd been at the clinic's bank checking on our business line of credit. In reality, Eric had already confirmed that Tyler had spent the afternoon at a local notary's office, validating the fraudulent power of attorney. "You look quiet tonight, honey," Tyler said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Everything okay at work?" "Just thinking about what Claire said today," I lied smoothly, offering a tired, compliant smile. "She mentioned the meeting tomorrow morning, about protecting the commercial property under the Rhodes Trust. She made a lot of sense." Tyler's hand paused over his water glass. A flash of profound relief crossed his features, followed quickly by a smug, condescending warmth. "Really? Wow. I'm so glad you talked to Mom. She only wants what's best for us, you know? It's just about streamlining our assets so we don't get slammed by taxes or liability if Kyle's situation goes south." "I trust you, Tyler," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they had the desired effect. His posture relaxed completely. He thought the psychological gaslighting had worked. He thought I was still the naive 26-year-old who signed papers at dinner parties without reading the fine print. At 11 p.m., Tyler went to sleep, snoring softly beside me. I waited until his breathing was deep and rhythmic before I slid out from under the covers. I slipped his phone from the nightstand, using his thumb to unlock the screen while he slept. I took the phone into the bathroom, closing the door until only a sliver of light illuminated the dark room. I opened his messaging apps and began systematically photographing every conversation with Claire and Kyle using my own phone. The messages went back months. It was a cold, calculated blueprint of destruction. "She's too attached to that property. Claire had texted Tyler in March. We need to make her feel like the clinic is failing, so she looks to us for financial security. Stop putting money into the joint account. Let her feel the squeeze. Tyler's reply made my stomach wrench. I'm transferring the $50,000 tomorrow for Kyle's down payment. She won't notice. She trusts me blindly. But the most recent thread from that afternoon was the one that truly shattered whatever lingering piece of my heart remained. It was a message from Kyle to Tyler, containing a screenshot of a real estate listing for a luxury condo in the city. Nice place for your new start, Kyle had written. Tyler's response was immediate. Once the signing goes through tomorrow and the property is legally tied to the trust, I'm filing the divorce papers. She'll be stuck fighting the trust for her own money, and by the time her lawyers untangle it, the assets will be gone. I can't keep living with her. It's exhausting pretending to care. I leaned against the cold bathroom tile, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. They weren't just stealing my money to save Kyle. They were using my own inheritance to fund Tyler's exit from our marriage. The weekly Sunday calls weren't just to see if I was home. They were ensuring I wasn't discovering the affair Tyler was having at the Crestview Lodge or meeting with lawyers of my own. I stood up, wiped a solitary tear from my cheek, and looked at myself in the mirror. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, glittering rage. They wanted a signing at 10 a.m. I was going to give them one they would never forget. The next morning, Tuesday, arrived with a bleak, gray sky that mirrored the cold clarity inside my chest. Tyler was humming as he got dressed, selecting his best navy suit. He was dressing for a celebration, the day he would finally strip me of my independence and secure his freedom with my money. Are you sure you don't want to come with me to the office, honey? Tyler asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. His tone was dripping with artificial tenderness. It's just standard paperwork, but Mom would love to see you. No, you handle it, I said, keeping my voice soft, letting a faint tremble enter my words to play into his narrative of my fragility. I have a few errands to run. Just call me when it's done. Will do, he said, turning to give me a kiss. I let him touch his lips to my forehead. It felt like the kiss of Judas. Love you, sweetie. See you tonight. The moment the front door clicked shut, I moved. I didn't have time to cry or process the humiliation of knowing my husband was planning to discard me like trash the moment the ink dried. I had exactly 2 hours before their 10 a.m. meeting to dismantle their entire operation. My first stop was the bank. Because Tyler hadn't legally executed the power of attorney paperwork yet, that was happening at 10, our joint commercial account was still technically under my primary control. I sat across from the branch manager, presenting the original deed to my property and my grandmother's trust documents. I need to freeze the commercial rental income account immediately due to suspected fraudulent activity, I told her, handing over a copy of the unauthorized $50,000 transfer Tyler had made to Rhodes Holdings. And I want to withdraw the remaining balance of our joint household checking and savings. The manager looked at the documentation, her expression hardening into professional severity. The transfer to Rhodes Holdings was done without a secondary signature, which violates the threshold policy for this type of account. We can freeze the commercial funds right now, and I can liquidate the joint personal accounts, per your request, as a primary co-owner. 20 minutes later, I walked out of the bank with a cashier's check for $84,000. The entirety of our shared liquid assets, minus the stolen $50,000. Next, I drove to the office of Eric, my real estate attorney. He was waiting for me with a notary and a forensic accountant. Together, we drafted a formal, legally binding revocation of power of attorney. Because the original document I signed 2 years ago was a limited power of attorney buried in a tax bundle, it could be revoked instantly by filing a public notice with the county clerk. Eric worked with a speed born of righteous anger. By 9:45 a.m., the revocation was stamped, filed, and digitally logged into the state's registry. Legally, the document Tyler was holding in his briefcase was now nothing more than a worthless piece of paper. If he attempted to use it to sign my property into the Rhodes Trust at 10 o'clock, he would be committing a felony. But I didn't want to just stop him. Stopping him meant they would regroup, find another loophole, or tie me up in divorce court while hiding the $50,000 they had already stolen. I wanted them to expose themselves in front of the one thing they valued more than money, their social standing. At 10:15 a.m., my phone began to buzz. It was Tyler. I didn't answer. Then Claire called. I let it ring. Then Kyle called. I declined the call. A text from Tyler flashed across my screen. "Where are you? There's a problem with the bank verification at the lawyer's office. Call me right now." I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the luxury country club where Claire was hosting her annual spring charity gala that evening. The event was the pinnacle of her social calendar, a gathering of the city's wealthiest elites, judges, and business owners. The Rhodes family reputation was built entirely on the illusion of impeccable grace, charity, and flawless family values. I walked into the grand ballroom under the guise of helping with the seating arrangements. The decorators were setting up crystal vases and silk linens. I approached the media coordinator, a young woman I had hired for Claire's previous events, and handed her a thumb drive. Claire wanted me to drop off the family tribute slideshow for the main projector, I said, offering a warm, helpful smile. "It's a surprise for the guests. Can you cue it to play right after her opening speech at 8 o'clock? "Of course," the coordinator smiled, taking the drive. "I'll set it up right now." On that drive wasn't a family slideshow. It was a chronological high-resolution record of their greed. The bank statements showing the stolen $50,000, the text messages planning to bankrupt my clinic, the screenshots of Tyler's luxury condo arrangements, and the filed revocation of power of attorney. I spent the afternoon at a quiet hotel on the opposite side of town, away from the path Tyler or his family would take to find me. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the hours tick away in the digital clock. My phone was a constant vibrating entity on the nightstand. Tyler called 14 times. Claire called 6. Kyle sent a string of increasingly frantic texts that degenerated from forced concern to naked aggression. "Where the hell are you?" The final text from Tyler read, sent at 4:30 p.m. The bank froze the commercial account. "The lawyer says the power of attorney was revoked this morning. What did you do? You're ruining this family. Call me." I didn't feel the impulse to reply. I felt nothing but a profound, hollow stillness. For years, I had allowed myself to be manipulated by their sighs, their subtle guilt trips, and their polite condescension. I had spent countless nights wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough to earn their genuine acceptance. Now, seeing their panic laid bare in text messages, I realized the truth. They never saw me as a person. I was just an asset to be liquidated. At 6 p.m., I showered and changed into a structured, elegant black dress. It wasn't the kind of dress Claire preferred me to wear. She liked me in soft, muted pastels that made me blend into the background of her family photos. This dress was sharp, minimal, and commanding. I checked my purse. Inside was the certified cashier's check for $84,000, a copy of the filed revocation, and a folder containing the printouts of Tyler's text messages regarding his planned divorce and his secret boutique hotel stays. Before I left the room, I called a local process server named Logan, whom Eric had recommended. "We're on track for 8 o'clock?" I asked, my voice flat and controlled. "Yes, ma'am," Logan replied. "I have the divorce petition and the civil suit for fiduciary fraud ready. I'll be waiting at the entrance of the country club." "Perfect," I said. "Wait until the presentation begins. I want him to receive them when he has nowhere to hide." I drove to the country club, arriving at exactly 7:30 p.m. The parking lot was filled with luxury sedans and SUVs. Valets were moving quickly under the grand portico, and the sound of a live string quartet drifted out through the heavy mahogany doors. I entered through the side kitchen entrance, avoiding the main lobby where the receiving line was stationed. I didn't want Claire or Tyler to see me before the main event. I needed them to think I was still missing, spinning in a panic somewhere, or perhaps hiding in fear of their anger. I wanted them to feel a false sense of security, to believe that despite the morning's clerical errors, they could still salvage their night and control the narrative. I slipped into the back of the grand ballroom, standing in the shadows behind the heavy velvet drapes. The room was breathtakingly beautiful, lit by hundreds of flickering candles and massive crystal chandeliers. Claire was in her element, floating from table to table in a shimmering silver gown, holding a glass of champagne, her face a mask of radiant philanthropy. Tyler stood near the bar, looking pale and tense, his eyes constantly darting toward the entrance. He kept checking his watch, his hand visibly shaking as he adjusted his cuffs. Kyle was beside him, whispering fiercely into his ear, his face flushed with anger. They looked like a family under siege, but they were trying desperately to maintain the facade for the elite crowd surrounding them. They didn't know that the siege was already over. The walls had already fallen. They were just waiting for the dust to settle. At 7:55 p.m., the chime of a crystal glass echoed through the ballroom. The chatter subsided, and the guests began taking their seats. Claire climbed the small stairs to the elevated podium at the front of the room, a microphone in her hand, her smile widening as the applause washed over her. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and sent a single text to the media coordinator booth. "Everything is ready. Run the file." "Welcome, dear friends." Claire's voice echoed flawlessly through the high-end sound system, dripping with her signature calculated warmth. "Every year, we gather to give back to the community that has given us so much. Family, integrity, and legacy, these are the pillars the road's name stands upon." From the shadows behind the drapes, I watched Tyler lean against a pillar near the stage. He looked sick. His eyes were still scanning the crowd, completely unaware that I was standing less than 20 feet behind him. "Tonight, as we celebrate our collective achievements," Claire continued, gesturing gracefully toward the massive projection screen behind her, "I want to share a brief look into the heart of our family journey." She stepped back, clapping her hands gently, signaling the media booth. The chandelier lights dimmed automatically. The crowd fell into an expectant, polite silence. The screen flickered to life, but instead of the sweeping drone footage of the Rhodes estate or photos of their charity work, a massive, crystal-clear PDF document appeared on the wall. It was the certified fraud report from the bank, highlighted in neon yellow, detailing the unauthorized $50,000 transfer from my clinic account to Rhodes Holdings. A low murmur rippled through the front tables. Claire's smile froze. She turned her head slowly, her eyes widening as she looked at the screen. Before she could speak into the microphone, the slide changed. Now, towering over the wealthiest elites in the city, were the text messages. The text font was massive, easily readable from the back of the ballroom. She trusts me blindly, Tyler's digital voice screamed from the wall. Stop putting money into the joint account. Let her feel the squeeze. Claire's text message followed immediately beneath it. The ballroom went completely breathless. The only sound was the sharp, collective intake of air from 100 people, realizing they were witnessing a public execution. I saw a prominent city judge at table 4 lean forward, his brow furrowed as he read the explicit blueprint of financial exploitation. Turn it off, Kyle shouted from the side of the stage, his face turning a deep, violent purple. Hey, cut the feed! But the media coordinator had my explicit instructions, and the door to the booth was locked from the inside. The presentation continued relentlessly. The next slide featured the screenshot of the luxury condo Tyler had chosen, side by side with his message. Once the signing goes through, I'm filing the divorce papers. She'll be stuck fighting the trust for her own money. Tyler looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His face drained of all color, turning a translucent, ghostly white. He took a step backward, stumbling against a chair, his hands flying to his mouth. I stepped out from behind the velvet drapes, walking calmly and deliberately down the center aisle of the ballroom. The dim light from the screen illuminated my path. Heads turned toward me as I walked. The silence in the room so absolute that the soft click of my heels against the hardwood floor sounded like gunfire. I stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at Claire. Her microphone was still on, picking up the sound of her rapid, shallow breathing. Here is the rest of the documentation, Claire, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying perfectly across the silent room. I reached into my bag and placed the folder containing the filed revocation of power of attorney and the bank liquidation receipts on the podium right next to her trembling hand. At that exact moment, Logan, the process server, walked through the main double doors in his bright, reflective vest. He walked straight up to Tyler, who was frozen in a state of sheer shock, and dropped a thick stack of legal documents into his chest. Tyler Rhodes, you've been served with a petition for dissolution of marriage and a civil summons for fiduciary fraud, Logan announced clearly, his voice professional and loud enough for everyone to hear. Kyle lunged forward, grabbing the microphone from his mother's hand. This is a lie! This is a malicious, fabricated attack on our family. Get her out of here! But nobody moved. The security guards, local off-duty officers who knew my family clinic well, stood by the doors with their arms crossed, their eyes fixed on the screen behind Kyle. The truth was too massive, too undeniable, and too thoroughly documented to be shouted down. Claire sank into a chair on the stage, her cashmere shawl slipping from her shoulders onto the floor. The illusion of her flawless family, her impeccable grace, and her social empire vanished in the span of 3 minutes. They hadn't just lost my money. They had lost their currency of respect in the city. I looked at Tyler one last time. He was staring down at the divorce papers in his hands, tears of pure humiliation spilling over his cheeks as his business associates and friends began quietly standing up from their tables, looking away in disgust. The morning after the gala, the house was completely silent. I sat at the kitchen island, a cup of black coffee cooling between my hands, watching the sunlight cut through the blinds. Tyler hadn't come home. His clothes were still in the closet, his keys were missing from the hook by the door, and his presence felt like a faint, vanishing stain on a canvas that was now entirely mine. By noon, the fallout had moved from the ballroom to the legal system. Eric called to inform me that the Rhodes family's corporate attorneys had already reached out. desperately seeking a non-disclosure agreement to prevent the text messages and financial audits from becoming part of a permanent public court record. "They're terrified," Eric said, his tone lacking any sense of celebration. Kyle's remaining investors pulled their capital this morning after the screenshots leaked to the local business journal. The Rhodes Trust is exposed, and Tyler's attorney is hinting that they want to settle the divorce immediately. They'll return the $50,000 if you drop the fraud charges. "Tell them I'll consider it once the cash is in my primary account," I said quietly, "but there won't be an NDA." I hung up the phone and walked through the quiet rooms of the house. I thought that winning, exposing them completely and securing my financial survival, would feel like a sudden, rushing wave of relief. I thought the weight in my chest would lift the moment they were held accountable. Instead, it just felt empty. The satisfaction of revenge is a fleeting, clinical thing. It protects your life, your assets, and your future. But it doesn't undo the years you spent believing a lie. It doesn't erase the memory of sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by people who smiled at you while calculating exactly how much it would cost to destroy you. The realization that every Sunday check-in, every gentle inquiry about my solitude, was merely a logistical calculation, was a heavy, permanent scar on my perception of trust. A few days later, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. My heart skipped a beat, an involuntary, primal jolt of anxiety racking my body before I even saw the screen. I picked it up. It wasn't Claire. It was a generic notification from an app, but the timing was a cruel reminder of how deeply the routine had been burned into my psyche. I walked out to the backyard, looking at the trees swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. I was 28 years old, financially secure, and completely independent. The clinic was safe, the commercial property was entirely under my control, and the people who had tried to reduce me to a stepping stone were currently dismantling their own legacy to pay for their legal defenses. I had saved my life with a single lie on a Sunday afternoon. But as I looked out at the quiet world before me, I knew that the real work wasn't the revenge I had executed so flawlessly in that ballroom. The real work was learning how to live in the quiet that followed, learning how to hear an honest question without looking for the knife hidden behind the words. That is the complete story of how a single Sunday check-in changed my life forever, and how silence became my greatest weapon against the people who claim to love me. If you found this narrative compelling and want to support more dark, realistic deep dives into psychological realism and family betrayal, please leave a like on this video. Your engagement helps the channel grow immensely. Comment below with your thoughts on how the revenge was handled, and don't forget to subscribe to Whispered Wrongs for the next story.